Section 13 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Straw Ox. There was once upon a time an old man and an old woman. The old man worked in the fields as a pitch burner, while the old woman sat at home and spun flax. They were so poor that they could save nothing at all. All their earnings went in bare food, and when that was gone, there was nothing left. At last the old woman had a good idea. "Look now, husband," cried she, "make me a straw ox, and smear it all over with tar." "Why, you foolish woman," said he, "what's the good of an ox of that sort?" "Never mind," said she, "you just make it. I know what I am about." What was the poor man to do? He set to work and made the ox of straw, and smeared it all over with tar. The night passed away, and at early dawn the old woman took her distaff, and drove the straw ox out into the steppe to graze, and she herself sat down behind a hillock, and began spinning her flax, and cried, "Graze away, little ox, while I spin my flax. Graze away, little ox, while I spin my flax." And while she spun, her head drooped down, and she began to doze. And while she was dozing, from behind the dark wood and from the back of the huge pines, a bear came rushing out upon the ox, and said, "Who are you? Speak and tell me." And the ox said, "A 3-year-old heifer am I, made of straw and smeared with tar." "Oh," said the bear, "stuffed with straw and trimmed with tar, are you? Then give me of your straw and tar, that I may patch up my ragged fur again." "Take some," said the ox, and the bear fell upon him and began to tear away at the tar. He tore and buried his teeth in it till he found he couldn't let go again. He tugged and he tugged, but it was no good, and the ox dragged him gradually off goodness knows where. Then the old woman awoke, and there was no ox to be seen. "Alas, old fool that I am," cried she, "perchance it has gone home." Then she quickly caught up her distaff and spinning board, threw them over her shoulders, and hastened off home. And she saw that the ox had dragged the bear up to the fence, and in she went to the old man. "Dad, Dad," she cried, "look, look, the ox has brought us a bear. Come out and kill it." And the old man jumped up, tore off the bear, tied him up, and threw him in the cellar. Next morning, between dark and dawn, the old woman took her distaff and drove the ox into the steppe to graze. She herself sat down by a mound, began spinning, and said, "Graze, graze away, little ox, while I spin my flax. Graze, graze away, little ox, while I spin my flax." And while she spun, her head drooped down, and she dozed. And lo! from behind the dark wood, from the back of the huge pines, a grey wolf came rushing out upon the ox, and said, "Who are you? Come, tell me." "I am a 3-year-old heifer, stuffed with straw and trimmed with tar," said the ox. "Oh, trimmed with tar, are you? Then give me of your tar to tar my sides, that the dogs and the sons of dogs tear me not." "Take some," said the ox. And with that the wolf fell upon him, and tried to tear the tar off. He tugged and tore with his teeth, but could get none off. Then he tried to let go and couldn't. Tug and worry as he might, it was no good. When the old woman woke, there was no heifer in sight. "Maybe my heifer has gone home," she cried. "I'll go home and see." When she got there, she was astonished, for by the paling stood the ox with the wolf still tugging at it. She ran and told her old man, and her old man came and threw the wolf into the cellar also. On the 3rd day, the old woman again drove her ox into the pastures to graze, and sat down by a mound and dozed off. Then a fox came running up. "Who are you?" and asked the ox. "I'm a 3-year-old heifer, stuffed with straw and daubed with tar." "Then give me some of your tar to smear my sides with, when those dogs and sons of dogs tear my hide." "Take some," said the ox. Then the fox fastened her teeth in him, and couldn't draw them out again. The old woman told her old man, and he took and cast the fox into the cellar in the same way. And after that they caught Pussy Swiftfoot, footnote the hare, end footnote, likewise. So when he had got them all safely, the old man sat down on a bench before the cellar and began sharpening a knife. And the bear said to him, "Tell me, daddy, what are you sharpening your knife for?" "To flay your skin off, that I may make a leather jacket for myself and a pelisse for my old wife." "Oh, don't flay me, daddy dear, rather let me go, and I'll bring you a lot of honey." "Very well, see you do it." And he unbound and let the bear go. Then he sat down on the bench, and again began sharpening his knife. And the wolf asked him, "Daddy, what are you sharpening your knife for?" "To flay off your skin, that I may make me a warm cap against the winter." "Oh, don't flay me, daddy dear, and I'll bring you a whole herd of little sheep." "Well, see that you do it." And he let the wolf go. Then he sat down and began sharpening his knife again. The fox put out her little snout and asked him, "Be so kind, dear daddy, and tell me why you are sharpening your knife." "Little foxes," said the old man, "have nice skins that do capitally for collars and trimmings, and I want to skin you." "Oh, don't take my skin away, daddy dear, and I will bring you hens and geese." "Very well, see that you do it." And he let the fox go. The hare now alone remained, and the old man began sharpening his knife on the hare's account. "Why do you do that?" asked Puss, and he replied, "Little hares have nice, little, soft, warm skins, which will make me gloves and mittens against the winter." "Oh, daddy dear, don't flay me, and I'll bring you kale and good cauliflower, if only you let me go." Then he let the hare go also. Then they went to bed, but very early in the morning, when it was neither dusk nor dawn, there was a noise in the doorway, like "Durr." "Daddy," cried the old woman, "there's some one scratching at the door, go and see who it is." The old man went out, and there was the bear carrying a whole hive full of honey. The old man took the honey from the bear, but no sooner did he lie down than again there was another "Durr" at the door. The old man looked out and saw the wolf driving a whole flock of sheep into the yard. Close on his heels came the fox, driving before him geese and hens, and all manner of fowls. And last of all came the hare, bringing cabbage and kale and all manner of good food. And the old man was glad, and the old woman was glad, and the old man sold the sheep and oxen, and got so rich that he needed nothing more. As for the straw-stuffed ox, it stood in the sun till it fell to pieces. End of section 13. Section 14 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Golden Slipper. There was once upon a time an old man and an old woman, and the old man had a daughter, and the old woman had a daughter, and the old woman said to the old man, "Go and buy a heifer, that thy daughter may have something to look after." So the old man went to the fair and bought a heifer. Now the old woman spoiled her own daughter, but was always snapping at the old man's daughter. Yet the old man's daughter was a good hard-working girl, while as for the old woman's daughter, she was but an idle slut. She did nothing but sit down all day with her hands in her lap. One day the old woman said to the old man's daughter, Look now, thou doubter of a dog, go and drive out the heifer to graze. Here thou hast 2 bundles of flax. See that thou unravel it, and reel it, and bleach it, and bring it home all ready in the evening." Then the girl took the flax, and drove the heifer out to graze. So the heifer began to graze, but the girl sat down and began to weep. And the heifer said to her, "Tell me, dear little maiden, wherefore dost thou weep?" "Alas, why should I not weep? My stepmother has given me this flax, and bidden me unravel it, and reel it, and bleach it, and bring it back as cloth in the evening." "Grieve not, maiden," said the heifer, "it will all turn out well. Lie down to sleep." So she lay down to sleep, and when she awoke the flax was all unravelled and reeled and spun into fine cloth and bleached. Then she drove the heifer home, and gave the cloth to her stepmother. The old woman took it and hid it away, that nobody might know that the old man's daughter had brought it to her. The next day she said to her own daughter, "Dear little daughter, drive the heifer out to graze, and here is a little piece of flax for thee. Unravel it, and reel it, or unravel it not, and reel it not, as thou likest best, but bring it home with thee." Then she drove the heifer out to graze, and threw herself down in the grass, and slept the whole day, and did not even take the trouble to go and moisten the flax in the cooling stream. And in the evening she drove the heifer back from the field, and gave her mother the flax. "Oh, mammy," she said, "my head ached so the whole day, and the sun scorched so that I couldn't go down to the stream to moisten the flax." "Never mind," said her mother, "lie down and sleep. It will do for another day." And the next day she called the old man's daughter again. "Get up, thou daughter of a dog, and take the heifer out to graze. And here thou hast a bundle of raw flax. Unravel it, heckle it, wind it on to thy spindles, bleach it, weave with it, and make it into fine cloth for me by the evening." Then the girl drove out the heifer to graze. The heifer began grazing, but she sat down beneath a willow tree, and threw her flax down beside her, and began weeping with all her might. But the heifer came up to her and said, "Tell me, little maiden, wherefore dost thou weep?" "Why should I not weep?" said she, and she told the heifer all about it. "Grieve not," said the heifer, "it will all come right, but lie down to sleep." So she lay down and immediately fell asleep. And by evening the bundle of raw flax was heckled and spun and reeled, and the cloth was woven and bleached, so that one could have made shirts of it straight off. Then she drove the heifer home, and gave the cloth to her stepmother. Then the old woman said to herself, "How comes it that this daughter of the son of the dog has done all her tasks so easily? The heifer must have got it done for her, I know. But I'll put a stop to all this, thou daughter of the son of a dog," said she. Then she went to the old man and said, "Father, kill and cut to pieces this heifer of thine, for because of it thy daughter does not a stroke of work. She drives the heifer out to graze, and goes to sleep the whole day and does nothing." "Then I'll kill it," said he. But the old man's daughter heard what he said, and went into the garden and began to weep bitterly. The heifer came to her and said, "Tell me, dear little maiden, wherefore dost thou weep?" "Why should I not weep," she said, "when they want to kill thee?" "Don't grieve," said the heifer, "it will all come right. When they have killed me, ask thy stepmother to give thee my entrails to wash, and in them thou wilt find a grain of corn. Plant this grain of corn, and out of it will grow up a willow tree, and whatever thou dost want, go to this willow tree and ask, and thou shalt have thy heart's desire." Then her father slew the heifer, and she went to her stepmother and said, "Prithee, let me have the entrails of the heifer to wash." And her stepmother answered, "As if I would let anybody else do such work but thee." Then she went and washed them, and sure enough she found the grain of corn, planted it by the porch, trod down the earth, and watered it a little. And the next morning when she awoke, she saw that a willow tree had sprung out of this grain of corn, and beneath the willow tree was a spring of water, and no better water was to be found anywhere in the whole village. It was as cold and clear as ice. When Sunday came around, the old woman tricked her pet daughter out finely, and took her to church. But to the old man's daughter she said, "Look to the fire, thou slut! Keep a good fire burning, and get ready the dinner, and make everything in the house neat and tidy, and have thy best frock on, and all the shirts washed against I come back from church. And if thou hast not all these things done, thou shalt say good-bye to dear life." So the old woman and her daughter went to church, and the smart little stepdaughter made the fire burn up, and got the dinner ready, and then went to the willow tree and said, willow tree, come out of thy bark. Lady Anna, come when I call thee." Then the willow tree did its duty, and shook all its leaves, and a noble lady came forth from it. "Dear little lady, sweet little lady, what are thy commands?" said she. "Give me," said she, "a grand dress, and let me have a carriage and horses, for I would go to God's house." And immediately she was dressed in silk and satin, with golden slippers on her feet, and the carriage came up, and she went to church. When she entered the church there was a great to-do, and every one said, "Oh, oh, oh, who is it? Is it perchance some princess or some queen? For the like of it we have never seen before." Now the young Tsarevich chanced to be in the church at that time. When he saw her, his heart began to beat. He stood there and could not take his eyes off her. And all the great captains and courtiers marvelled at her, and fell in love with her straightway. But who she was they knew not. When service was over, she got up and drove away. When she got home, she took off all her fine things, and put on all her rags again, and sat in the window corner, and watched the folk coming from church. Then her stepmother came back too. "Is the dinner ready?" said she. "Yes, it is ready." "Hast thou sewn the shirts?" "Yes, the shirts are sewn too." Then they sat down to meat, and began to relate how they had seen such a beautiful young lady at church. The Tsarevich, said the old woman, instead of saying his prayers, was looking at her all the while, so goodly was she. Then she said to the old man's daughter, "As for thee, thou slut, though thou hast sewn the shirts and bleached them, thou art but a dirty underwench." On the following Sunday, the stepmother again dressed up her daughter, and took her to church. But before she went, she said to the old man's daughter, "See that thou keep the fire in, thou slut." And she gave her a lot of work to do. The old man's daughter very soon did it all. And then she went to the willow tree and said, bright spring willow, change thee, transform thee." Then still statelier dames stepped forth from the willow tree. "Dear little lady, sweet little lady, what commands hast thou to give?" She told them what she wanted, and they gave her a gorgeous dress, and put golden shoes on her feet, and she went to church in a grand carriage. The Tsarevich was again there, and at the sight of her he stood as if rooted to the ground, and couldn't take his eyes from her. Then the people began to whisper, "Is there none here who knows her? Is there none who knows who such a handsome lady may be?" And they began to ask each other, "Dost thou know her? Dost thou know her?" But the Tsarevich said, "Whoever will tell me who this great lady is, to him will I give a sackload of gold ducats." Then they inquired, and laid all their heads together, but nothing came of it. But the Tsarevich had a jester who was always with him, and used always to jest and cut capers whenever this child of the Tsar was sad. So now too he began to laugh at the young Tsarevich, and say to him, "I know how to find out who this fine lady is." "How?" asked the young Tsarevich. "I'll tell thee," said the jester. "Smear with pitch the place in church where she is wont to stand, then her slippers will stick to it, and she, in her hurry to get away, will never notice that she has left them behind her in church." So the Tsarevich ordered his courtiers to smear the spot with pitch straight away.
Next time, when the service was over, she got up as usual and hastened away, but left her golden slippers behind her. When she got home, she took off her costly raiment and put on her rags and waited in the window corner till they came from church. When they came from church, they had all sorts of things to talk about, and how the young Tsarevich had fallen in love with the grand young lady, and how they were unable to tell him whence she came, or who she was. And the stepmother hated the old man's daughter all the more because she had done her work so nicely. But the Tsarevich did nothing but pine away, and they proclaimed throughout the kingdom, "Who has lost a pair of golden slippers?" But none could tell. Then the Tsar sent his wise counselors throughout the kingdom to find her. "If ye do not find her," said he, "it will be the death of my child, and then ye also are dead men." So the Tsar's counselors went through all the towns and villages, and measured the feet of all the maidens against the golden slippers, and she was to be the bride of the Tsarevich, whom the golden slippers fitted. They went to the houses of all the princes, and all the nobles, and all the rich merchants, but it was of no avail. The feet of all the maidens were either too little or too large. Then they hied them to the huts of the peasants. They went on and on, they measured, and at last they were so tired that they could scarce draw one foot after the other. Then they looked about them and saw a beautiful willow tree standing by a hut, and beneath the willow tree was a spring of water. "Let us go and rest in the cool shade," said they. So they went and rested, and the old woman came out of the hut to them. "Hast thou a daughter, little mother?" said they. "Yes, that I have," said she. "One or two?" they asked. "Well, there's another," said she, "but she is not my daughter, she is a mere kitchen slut, the very look of her is nasty." "Very well," said they, "we will measure them with the golden slippers." "Good!" cried the old woman. Then she said to her own daughter, "Go, my dear little daughter, tidy thyself up a bit, and wash thy little feet." But the old man's daughter she drove behind the stove, and the poor thing was neither washed nor dressed. "Sit there, thou daughter of a dog," said she. Then the Tsar's counselors came into the hut to measure, and the old woman said to her daughter, "Put out thy little foot, darling." The counselors then measured with the slippers, but they wouldn't fit her at all. Then they said, "Tell us, little mother, where is thy other daughter?" "Oh, as for her, she is a mere slut, and besides she isn't dressed." "No matter," said they. "Where is she?" Then she came out from behind the stove, and her stepmother hustled her and said, "Get along, thou sluttish hussy." Then they measured her with the slippers, and they fitted like gloves, whereupon the courtiers rejoiced exceedingly and praised the Lord. "Well, little mother," said they, "we will take this daughter away with us." "What, take a slattern like that? Why, all the people will laugh at you." "Maybe they will," said they. Then the old woman scolded, and wouldn't let her go. "How can such a slut become the consort of the Tsar's son?" screeched she. "Nay, but she must come," said they. "Go dress thyself, maiden." "Wait but a moment," said she, "and I'll tire myself as is meet." Then she went to the spring beneath the willow tree, and washed and dressed herself, and she came back so lovely and splendid that the like of it can neither be thought of nor guessed at, but only told of in tales. As she entered the hut, she shone like the sun, and her stepmother had not another word to say. So they put her in a carriage and drove off, and when the Tsarevich saw her, he could not contain himself. "Make haste, O my father," cried he, "and give us thy blessing." So the Tsar blessed them, and they were wedded. Then they made a great feast, and invited all the world to it, and they lived happily together, and ate wheat bread to their heart's content. End of section 14. Section 15 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona.
Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Iron Wolf. There was once upon a time a parson who had a servant, and when this servant had served him faithfully for 12 years and upward, he came to the parson and said, "Let us now settle our accounts, master, and pay me what thou owest me. I have now served long enough, and would fain have a little place in the wide world all to myself." "Good," said the parson. "I'll tell thee now what wage I'll give thee for thy faithful service. I'll give thee this egg. Take it home, and when thou gettest there, make to thyself a cattle pen, and make it strong. Then break the egg in the middle of thy cattle pen, and thou shalt see something. But whatever thou doest, don't break it on thy way home, or all thy luck will leave thee." So the servant departed on his homeward way. He went on, and at last he thought to himself, "Come now, I'll see what is inside this egg of mine." So he broke it, and out of it came all sorts of cattle in such numbers that the open steppe became like a fair. The servant stood there in amazement, and he thought to himself, "However in God's world shall I be able to drive all those cattle back again?" He had scarcely uttered the words when the Iron Wolf came running up to him and said to him, "I'll collect and drive back all these cattle into the egg again, and I'll patch the egg up so that it will become quite whole. But in return for that," continued the Iron Wolf, "whenever thou dost sit down on the bridal bench," Footnote: Posad or posag, a bench covered with white cloth, on which the bride and bridegroom sat down together. End of footnote. "I'll come and eat thee." "Well," thought the servant to himself, "a lot of things may happen before I sit down on the bridal bench, and he comes to eat me, and in the meantime I shall get all these cattle." "Agreed then," said he. So the Iron Wolf immediately collected all the cattle, and drove them back into the egg, and patched up the egg, and made it whole just as it was before. The servant went home to the village where he lived, made him a cattle pen stronger than strong, went inside it, and broke the egg, and immediately that cattle pen was as full of cattle as it could hold. Then he took to farming and cattle breeding, and he became so rich that in the whole wide world there was none richer than he. He kept to himself, and his goods increased and multiplied exceedingly. The only thing wanting to his happiness was a wife, but a wife he was afraid to take. Now near to where he lived was a general who had a lovely daughter, and this daughter fell in love with the rich man. So the general went and said to him, "Come, why don't you marry? I'll give you my daughter and lots of money with her." "How is it possible for me to marry?" replied the man. "As soon as ever I sit down on the bridal bench, the Iron Wolf will come and eat me up." And he told the general all that had happened. "Oh, nonsense," said the general, "don't be afraid. I have a mighty host, and when the time comes for you to sit down on the bridal bench, we'll surround your house with 3 strong rows of soldiers, and they won't let the Iron Wolf get at you, I can tell you." So they talked the matter over till he let himself be persuaded, and then they began to make great preparations for the bridal banquet. Everything went off exceedingly well, and they made merry till the time came when bride and bridegroom were to sit down together on the bridal bench. Then the general placed his men on 3 strong rows all round the house so as not to let the Iron Wolf get in. And no sooner had the young people sat down upon the bridal bench than, sure enough, the Iron Wolf came running up. He saw the host standing round the house in 3 strong rows, but through all 3 rows he leaped and made straight for the house. But the man, as soon as he saw the Iron Wolf, leaped out of the window, mounted his horse, and galloped off with the wolf after him. Away and away he galloped, and after him came the wolf, but try as it would, it could not catch him up anyhow. At last, toward evening, the man stopped and looked about him, and saw that he was in a lone forest, and before him stood a hut.
He went up to this hut, and saw an old man and an old woman sitting in front of it, and said to them, "Would you let me rest a little while with you, good people?" "By all means," said they. "There's one thing, however, good people," said he. "Don't let the Iron Wolf catch me while I am resting with you." "Have no fear of that," replied the old couple. "We have a dog called Chutko, hearkener, who can hear a wolf coming a mile off, and he'll be sure to let us know." So he laid him down to sleep, and was just dropping off when Chutko began to bark. Then the old people awoke him and said, be off, for the Iron Wolf is coming," and they gave him the dog and a wheaten hearth cake as provision by the way. So he went on, and the dog followed after him till it began to grow dark, and then he perceived another hut in another forest. He went up to that hut, and in front of it were sitting an old man and an old woman. He asked them for a night's lodging. "Only," said he, "take care that the Iron Wolf doesn't catch me." "Have no fear of that," said they. "We have a dog here called Vashko, who can hear a wolf 9 miles off." So he laid him down and slept. Just before dawn Vashko began to bark. Immediately they woke him. "Run!" cried they, "the Iron Wolf is coming!" And they gave him the dog and a barley hearth cake as provision by the way. So he took the hearth cake, sat him on his horse, and off he went, and his 2 dogs followed after him. He went on and on he went till evening, when again he stopped and looked about him, and he saw that he was in another forest, and another little hut stood before him. He went into the hut, and there were sitting an old man and an old woman. "Will you let me pass the night here, good people?" said he. "Only take care that the Iron Wolf does not get hold of me." "Have no fear," said they. "We have a dog called Barry, who can hear a wolf coming 12 miles off. He'll let us know." So he lay down to sleep, and early in the morning Barry let them know that the Iron Wolf was drawing nigh. Immediately they awoke him. "'Tis high time for you to be off," they said. Then they gave him the dog and a buckwheat hearth cake as provision by the way. He took the hearth cake, sat him on his horse, and off he went. So now he had 3 dogs, and they all 3 followed him. He went on, and toward evening he found himself in front of another hut. He went into it, and there was nobody there. He went and lay down, and his dogs lay down also. Chutko on the threshold of the room door, Vashko at the threshold of the house door, and Barry at the threshold of the outer gate. Presently the Iron Wolf came trotting up. Immediately Chutko gave the alarm, Vashko nailed him to the earth, and Barry tore him to pieces. Then the man gathered his faithful dogs around him, mounted his horse, and went back to his own home. End of section 15. Section 16 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain, The 3 Brothers. There were once upon a time 3 brothers, and the third was a fool. And in their little garden grew golden apple trees with golden apples, and not far off lived a hog that had taken a fancy to these apples. So the father sent his sons into the garden to guard the trees. The eldest went first, and sat and watched till he was tired of watching and fell asleep. Then the hog crept in, and dug till he had digged up an apple tree, which he ate up, and then went his way. The father got up next morning, and counted his apple trees, and one of them was gone. The next night the father sent the second son to watch. He waited and watched till he also fell asleep, and the hog came again, and dug up and ate another golden apple tree, and made off. The next morning the father got up again and counted his trees, and another was gone. Then the fool said, "Dad, let me go too." But the father said, "O fool, fool, wherefore shouldst thou go? Thy wise brethren have watched to no purpose. What canst thou do?" "Hoity-toity," said the fool, "give me a gun, and I'll go all the same." His father wouldn't give him a gun, so he took it, and went to watch. He placed his gun across his knees, and sat down. He sat and sat, but nothing came, nothing came. He got drowsy, was nodding off, when his gun fell off his knees, and he awoke with a start, and watched more warily. At last he heard something, and there stood the hog. It began to dig up another tree, when he pulled the trigger, and bang! His brothers heard the sound, came running up, and were quite amazed to see a dead boar lying there, and said, "What will become of us now?" "Let us kill him," said the eldest brother, "and bury him in that ditch, and say that we killed the hog." So they took and slew him, and buried him in the ditch, and took the hog to their father, and said, "While we were watching, this hog came up and began digging, so we killed him and have brought him to you." One day a nobleman came by that way, and was surprised to see a beautiful elder bush growing out of the ditch. So he went up to it, cut off a branch, made him a flute out of it, and began playing upon it. But the flute played of its own accord, and made this moan: "Play, good master, play, but steal not my heart away. Me my brothers took and slew, in the ditch my body threw, for that hog shot down by me, that rooted up the tree." The nobleman went on to the inn, and there he found the fool's father. "Such a funny thing has happened to me," said the nobleman. "I went and cut me out a flute from an elder bush, and lo, it plays of its own accord." Then the father took the flute and tried his hand at it, and it sang: "Play, good daddy, play, but don't steal my heart away. Me my brothers took and slew, in the ditch my body threw, for that hog shot down by me, that rooted up the tree." The father was so astonished that he bought it, and took it home, and gave it to the mother for her to play upon it, and sang: "Play, good mammy, play, but don't steal my heart away. Me my brothers took and slew, in the ditch my body threw, for that hog shot down by me, that rooted up the tree." Then the father gave the flute to his brothers to play upon, but they wouldn't. "Nay, but you must," said their father. Then the younger brother took and played upon it: "Play, my brother, play, but don't steal my heart away. Me my brothers took and slew, in the ditch my body threw, for the hog shot down by me, that rooted up the tree." Then his father gave the flute to the elder brother who had slain him, but he wouldn't take it. "Take it and play upon it," roared his father at him. Then he took it and played: "Play, my brother, play, but don't steal my heart away. 'Twas thou who didst me slay, and stowed my corpse away, for the hog shot down by me, that rooted up the tree." "Then it was thou who didst slay him?" cried the father. What could the elder brother do but confess it? Then they dug the dead man up, and buried him in the cemetery. But they tied the elder brother to a wild horse, which scattered his bones about the endless steppe. But I was there, and drank wine and mead till my beard was wet. End of section 16.
Section number 17 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Tsar and the Angel. Somewhere, nowhere, in a certain kingdom, in a certain empire, time out of mind, and in no land of ours, dwelt a Tsar who was so proud, so very proud, that he feared neither God nor man. He listened to no good counsel from whithersoever it may come, but did only that which was good in his own eyes. and nobody durst put him right, and all his ministers and nobles grieved exceedingly, and all the people grieved likewise. One day this Tsar went to church. The priest was reading from Holy Scripture, and so he needs must listen. Now there were certain words there which pleased him not. To say such words to me, thought he, words that I can never forget, though I grow grey-headed. After service the Tsar went home and bade them send the priest to him. The priest came. How durst thou read such and such passages to me? Said the Tsar. They were written to be read, replied the priest. Written indeed! And wouldst thou then read everything that is written? Smear those places over with grease, and never dare to read them again, I say. 'Tis not I who have written those words, your majesty, said the priest, nor is it for such as I to smear them over. What? Thou dost presume to teach me? I am the Tsar, and it is thy duty to obey me. In all things will I obey thee, O Tsar, save only in sacred things. God is over them. Men cannot alter them. Not alter them, roared the Tsar. If I wish them altered, altered they must be. Strike me out those words instantly, I say, and never dare read them in church again. Dost hear? I dare not, said the priest. I have no will in the matter. I command thee, fellow. I dare not, O Tsar. Well, said the Tsar, I'll give thee 3 days to think about it, and on the evening of the 4th day appear before me, and I'll strike thy head from thy shoulders if thou dost not obey me. Then the priest bowed low and went home. The 3rd day was already drawing to a close, and the priest knew not what to do. It was no great terror to him to die for the faith, but what would become of his wife and children? He walked about and wept and wrung his hands. Oh, woe is me! Woe is me! At last he lay down on his bed, but sleep he could not. Only toward dawn did he doze off. Then he saw in a dream an angel standing at his head. Fear nothing, said the angel. God hath sent me down on earth to protect thee. So early in the morning the priest rose up full of joy and prayed gratefully to God. The Tsar also awoke early in the morning and bawled to his huntsmen to gather together and go a-hunting with him in the forest. So away they went hunting in the forest, and it was not long before a stag leaped out of the thicket beneath the very eyes of the Tsar. Off after it went the Tsar. Every moment the stag seemed to be faltering, and yet the Tsar could never quite come up with it. Hot with excitement, the Tsar spurred his horse on yet faster. Gee up! Gee up! He cried. Now we've got him. But here a stream crossed the road, and the stag plunged into the water. The Tsar was a good swimmer. I've got him now, at any rate, thought he. A little longer, and I shall hold him by the horns. So the Tsar took off his clothes, and into the water he plunged after the stag. But the stag swam across to the opposite bank, and the Tsar was extending his hand to seize him by the horns when there was no longer any stag to be seen. It was the angel who had taken the form of a stag. The Tsar was amazed. He looked about him on every side and wondered where the stag had gone. Then he saw some one on the other side of the river putting on his clothes, and presently the man mounted his horse and galloped away. The Tsar thought it was some evil-doer, but it was the self-same angel that had now put on the Tsar's clothes and gone away to collect the huntsmen and take them home. As for the Tsar, he remained all naked and solitary in the forest. At last he looked about him and saw, far, far away, smoke rising above the forest, and something like a dark cloud standing in the clear sky. "Maybe," thought he, "that is my hunting pavilion." So he went in the direction of the smoke, and came at last to a brick kiln. The brick burners came forth to meet him, and were amazed to see a naked man. "What is he doing here?" they thought, and they saw that his feet were lame and bruised, and his body covered with scratches. "Give me to drink," said he, "and I will fain eat something also." The brick-burners had pity on him. They gave him an old tattered garment to wear, and a piece of black bread and a gherkin to eat. Never from the day of his birth had the Tsar had such a tasty meal. "And now speak, O man," said they. "Who art thou?" "I'll tell you who I am," said he, when he had eaten his fill. "I am your Tsar. Lead me to my capital, and there I will reward you." "What, thou wretched rogue," they cried, "thou dost presume to mock us, thou old ragamuffin, and magnify thyself as a Tsar? Thou reward us, indeed!" And they looked at him in amazement and scorn. "Dare to laugh at me again," said he, "and I'll have your heads chopped off." For he forgot himself, and thought he was at home. "What, thou?" Then they fell upon him and beat him. They beat him and hauled him about most unmercifully, and then they drove him away, and off he went bellowing through the forest. He went on and on till at last he saw once more a smoke rising up out of the wood. Again he thought, "That is surely my hunting pavilion," and so he went up to it, and toward evening he came to another brick kiln. There, too, they had pity upon and kindly entreated him. They gave him to eat and to drink. They also gave him ragged hose and a tattered shirt, for they were very poor people. They took him to be a runaway soldier or some other poor man, but when he had eaten his fill and clothed himself, he said to them, "I am your Tsar." They laughed at him, and again he began to talk roughly to the people. Then they fell upon him and thrashed him soundly, and drove him right away. And he wandered all by himself through the forest till it was night. Then he laid him down beneath a tree, and so he passed the night, and rising up very early, fared on his way straight before him. At last he came to a third brick kiln, but he did not tell the brick burners there that he was the Tsar. All he thought of now was how he might reach his capital. The people here, too, treated him kindly, and seeing that his feet were lame and bruised, they had compassion upon him, and gave him a pair of very, very old boots. And he asked them, "Do ye know by which way I can get to the capital?" They told him, but it was a long, long journey that would take the whole day. So he went the way they had told him, and he went on till he came to a little town, and there the roadside sentries stopped him. "Halt!" they cried. He halted. "Your passport?" Footnote: This is a good instance of the modern intrusions in these ancient Kazki. An angel and a passport in the same tale. End footnote. "I have none." "What? No passport? Then thou art a vagabond. Seize him!" they cried. So they seized him and put him in a dungeon. Shortly after they came to examine him, and asked him, "Whence art thou?" "From such and such a capital," said he. Then they ordered him to be put in irons and taken thither. So they took him back to that capital and put him in another dungeon. Then the custodians came round to examine the prisoners, and one said one thing and one said another, till at last it came to the turn of the Tsar. "Who art thou, old man?" they asked. Then he told them the whole truth. "Once I was the Tsar," he said, and he related all that had befallen him. Then they were much amazed, for he was not at all like a Tsar, for indeed he had been growing thin and haggard for a long time, and his beard was all long and tangled, and yet, for all that, he stood them out that he was the Tsar. So they made up their minds that he was crazy, and drove him away. "Why should we keep this fool for ever," said they, "and waste the Tsar's bread upon him?" So they let him go, and never did any man feel so wretched on God's earth as did that wretched Tsar. Willingly would he have done any sort of work if he had only known how. But he had never been used to work, so he had to go along begging his bread, and could scarce beg enough to keep body and soul together. He lay at night at the first place that came to hand, sometimes in the tall grass of the steppes, sometimes beneath a fence. "That it should ever have come to this!" he sighed. But the angel who had made himself Tsar went home with the huntsman, and no man knew that he was not a Tsar, but an angel. The same evening that priest came to him and said, "Do thy will, O Tsar, and strike off my head, for I cannot blot out one word of Holy Scripture." And the Tsar said to him, "Glory be to God, for now I know that there is at least one priest in my tsardom who stands firm for God's word. I'll make thee the highest bishop in this realm." The priest thanked him, bowed down to earth, and departed marvelling. "What is this wonder?" thought he, "that the haughty Tsar should have become so just and gentle?" But all men marvelled at the change that had come over the Tsar. He was now so mild and gracious. Nor did he spend all his days in the forest, but went about inquiring of his people if any were wronged or injured by their neighbours, and if justice were done. He took count of all, and rebuked the unjust judges, and saw that every man had his rights. And the people now rejoiced as much as they had grieved heretofore. And justice was done in all the tribunals, and no bribes were taken. But the Tsar, the real Tsar, grew more and more wretched. Then, after 3 years, a ukase went forth that on such and such a day all people were to come together to a great banquet given by the Tsar. All were to be there, both rich and poor, both high and lowly. And all the people came, and the unhappy Tsar came too. And so many long tables were set out in the Tsar's courtyard that all the people praised God when they saw the glad sight. And they all sat down at table and ate and drank, and the Tsar himself and his courtiers distributed the meat and drink to the guests as much as they would. But to the unfortunate Tsar they gave a double portion of everything. And they all ate and drank their fill. And then the Tsar began to inquire of the people whether any had suffered wrong or had not had justice done to him. And when the people began to disperse, the Tsar stood at the gate with a bag of money, and gave to every one a grivna, but to the unhappy Tsar he gave 3. About 2 pence, halfpenny. And after 3 years the Tsar gave another banquet, and again entertained all the people. And when he had given them both to eat and to drink, as much as they would, he inquired of them what was being done in his tsardom, and again gave a grivna to each one of them. But to the unlucky Tsar he gave a double portion of meat and drink, and 3 grivni. And again, after 3 years, he made yet another banquet, and proclaimed that all should come, both rich and poor, both earls and churls. And all the people came and ate and drank and bowed low before the Tsar and thanked him, and made ready to depart. The unlucky Tsar was also on the point of going, when the angel Tsar stopped him, and took him aside into the palace, and said to him, Lo, God hath tried thee, and chastised thy pride these 10 years. But me he sent to teach thee that a Tsar must have regard to the complaints of his people. So thou wast made poor and a vagabond on the face of the earth, and thou mightest pick up wisdom, if but a little. Look now that thou dost good to thy people, and judgest righteousness judgment, as from henceforth thou shalt be Tsar again. But I must fly back to God in heaven. And when he had said this he bade them wash and shave him, for his beard had grown right down to his girdle, and put upon him the raiment of a Tsar. And the angel said further, Go now into the inner apartments. There the courtiers of the Tsar are sitting and making merry, and none will recognize in thee the vagabond old man. May God help thee always to do good. And when the angel had said this he was no more to be seen, and only his clothes remained on the floor. Then the Tsar prayed gratefully to God, and went to the merrymaking of his courtiers, and henceforth he ruled his people justly, as the angel had bidden him. End of section 17. Recording by Linda Ray Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Section 18 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kyle Donnellan. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Story of Ivan and the Daughter of the Sun. There were once upon a time 4 brethren, and 3 of them remained at home, while the 4th went out to seek for work. His youngest brother came to a strange land, and hired himself out to a husbandman for 3 gold pieces a year. For 3 years he served his master faithfully, so at the end of his time he departed with 9 gold pieces in his pocket. The first thing he now did was to go to a spring, and into the spring he threw 3 of his gold pieces. "Let us see now," said he. "If I have been honest, they will come swimming back to me." Then he lay down by the side of the spring and went fast asleep. How long he slept there, who can tell? But at any rate, he woke up at last and went to the spring, but there was no sign of his money to be seen. Then he threw 3 more of the gold pieces into the spring, and again he lay down by the side of it and slept. Then he got up and went and looked into the spring, and still there was no sign of the money. So he threw in his 3 remaining gold pieces, and again lay down and slept. The 3rd time he arose and looked into the spring, and there, sure enough, was his money. All 9 of the gold pieces were floating on the surface of the water. And now his heart felt lighter, and he gathered up the 9 gold pieces and went on his way. On the road, he fell in with 3 Katsapi with a laden wagon. Katsapi, big billy goats, the name given by the clean-shaven Ruthenians to their hairy neighbors, the Russians. End footnote. He asked them concerning their wares, and they said they were carrying a load of incense. He begged them straight away to sell him this incense. Then they sold it to him for the gold pieces, and when he had bought it and they had departed, he kindled fire and burnt the incense, and offered it up to God as a sweet-smelling sacrifice. Then an angel flew down to him and said, O thou that hast offered this sweet-smelling sacrifice to God, what dost thou want for thine own self? Dost thou want a tsardom, or great riches? Or perchance the desire of thy heart is a good wife? Speak, for God will give thee whatsoever thou desirest. When the man had listened to the angel, he said to him, Tarry a while. I will go and ask those people who were plowing yonder. Now those people who were plowing there were his own brethren, but he did not know that they were his brethren. So he went up and said to the elder brother, Tell me, uncle, what shall I ask of God? A tsardom, or great riches, or a good wife? Tell me which of the three is the best gift to ask for. And his eldest brother said to him, I know not, and who does know? Go and ask someone else. So he went to the second brother, who was plowing a little farther on. He asked him the same question, but the man only shrugged his shoulders and said he didn't know either. Then he went to the third brother, who was the youngest of the three, and also plowing there. And he asked him, saying, Tell me now, which is the best gift to ask of God, a tsardom, a great riches, or a great wife? And the third brother said, What a question! Thou art too young for a tsardom, and great riches last for a little while. Ask God for a good wife, for if it please God to give thee a good wife, 'tis a gift that will bless thee all thy life long. So he went back to the angel and asked for a good wife. Then he went on his way till he came to a certain wood, and looking about him, he perceived that in this wood was a lake. And while he was looking at it, 3 wild doves came flying along and lit down upon this lake. They threw off their plumage and plunged into the water, and then he saw that they were not wild doves, but 3 fair ladies. They bathed in the lake, and in the meantime the youth crept up and looked to the raiment of one of them, and hid it behind the bushes. When they came out of the water, the third lady missed her clothes. Then the youth said to her, I know where thy clothes are, but I will not give them to thee, unless thou wilt be my wife. Good, cried she, thy wife will I be. Then she dressed herself, and they went together to the nearest village. When they got there, she said to him, Now go to the nobleman who owns the land here, and beg him for a place where we may build us a hut. So he went right up to the nobleman's castle, and entered his reception room, and said, Glory be to God! For ever and ever, replied the nobleman. What dost thou want here, Ivan? I have come, sir, to beg you of thee a place where I may build me a hut. A place for a hut, eh? Good, very good. Go home, and I'll speak to my overseer, and he shall appoint thee a place. So he returned from the nobleman's castle, and his wife said to him, Go now into the forest, and cut down an oak, a young oak, that thou canst span round with both arms. So he cut down such an oak as his wife had told him of, and she built a hut for the oak, for the overseer had come and shown them a place where they might build their hut. But when the overseer returned home, he praised loudly to his master, the wife of this Ivan. She is such and such, said he. Fair she may be, replied the nobleman, but she is another's. She need not be another's for long, replied the overseer. This Ivan is in our hands. Let us send him to see why it is the sun grows so red when he sets. That's just the same as if you sent him to a place whence he can never return. All the better. Then they sent for Ivan and gave him this errand, and he returned home to his wife, weeping bitterly. Then his wife asked him all about it, and she said, Well, I can tell thee all about the ways of the sun, for I am the sun's own daughter. So now I'll tell thee the whole matter. Go back to this nobleman, and say to him that the reason why the sun turns so red as he sets is this. Just as the sun is going down into the sea, 3 fair ladies rise out of it, and it is the sight of them which makes them turn so red all over. So he went back and told them. Oh ho, cried they, if you can go as far as that, you may now go a little farther. So they told him to go to hell, and see how it was there. Yes, said his wife, I know the road that leads to hell also very well, but the nobleman must let his overseer go with thee, or else he will never believe that thou really didst go to hell. So the nobleman told his overseer that he must go to hell too, and so they went together. And when they got there, the rulers of hell laid hands upon the overseer straightway, "Thou dog!" roared they. "We've been looking out for thee for some time." So Ivan returned without the overseer, and the nobleman said to him, "Where's my overseer?" "I left him in hell," said Ivan, "and they said there that they were waiting for you, sir, too." When the nobleman heard this, he hanged himself, but Ivan lived happily with his wife. End of section 18. Recording by Kyle Donnellan. Section 19 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kyle Donnellan. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Cat, the Cock, and the Fox. There was once upon a time a cat and a cock who agreed to live together. So they built them a hut on a dunghill, and the cock kept house while the cat went foraging for sausages. One day the fox came running up. "Open the door, little cock," cried she. "Pussy told me not to, little fox," said the cock. "Open the door, little cock," repeated the fox. "I tell you, Pussy told me not to, little fox." At last, however, the cock grew tired of always saying, "No." So he opened the door, and in the fox rushed, seized him in her jaws, and ran off with him. Then the cock cried, "Help, pussy, pussy, that foxy hussy has got me tight with all their might. Across her tail my legs do trail, along the bridge so stony." The cat heard it, gave chase to the fox, rescued the cock, brought him home, scolded him well, and said, "Now keep out of her jaws in the future, if you don't want to be killed altogether." Then the cat went out foraging for wheat, so that the cock might have something to eat. He had scarcely gone when the sly she-fox again came creeping up. "Dear little cock," said she, "pray open the door." "Nay, little fox, Pussy said I wasn't to." But the fox went on asking and asking till at last the cock let him in. Then the fox rushed at him, seized him by the neck, and ran off with him. Then the cock cried out, "Help, pussy, pussy, that foxy hussy has got me tight with all their might. Across her tail my legs do trail, across the bridge so stony." The cat heard it, and again he ran after the fox and rescued the cock, and gave the fox a sound drubbing. Then he said to the cock, "Now mind you, never let her come in again, or she'll eat you." But the next time the cat went out, the she-fox came again and said, "Dear little cock, open the door." "No, little fox, Pussy said I wasn't to." But the fox begged and begged so piteously that, at last, the cock was quite touched and opened the door. Then the fox caught him by the throat again and ran away with him, and the cock cried, "Help, pussy, pussy, that foxy hussy has got me tight with all their might. Across her tail my legs do trail, along the bridge so stony." The cat heard it and gave chase again. He ran and ran, but this time he couldn't catch the fox up. So he returned home and wept bitterly, because he was now all alone. At last, however, he dried his tears, and got him a little fiddle bow, and a big sack, and went to the fox's hole and began to play. "Fiddle-dee-dee, the foxy so wee had daughters twice two, and a little son too, called Fiddle-dee, come foxy and see my sweet minstrelsy." Then the fox's daughter said, "Mammy, I'll go out and see who it is that is playing so nicely." So out she skipped, but no sooner did Pussy see her, that he caught her a hold of her and popped her into his sack. Then he played again. "Fiddle-dee-dee, the foxy so wee had daughters twice two, and a little son too, called Fiddle-dee, come foxy and see my sweet minstrelsy." Then the second daughter skipped out, and Pussy caught her by the forehead, and popped her into his sack, and went on playing and singing till he had got all 4 daughters into his sack, and the little son also. Then the old fox was left all alone, and she waited and waited, but not one of them came back. At last she said to herself, "I'll go out and call them home, for the cock is roasting, and the milk pottage is simmering, and 'tis high time we had something to eat." So out she popped, and the cat pounced upon her, and killed her too. Then he went and drank up all the soup, and gobbled up all the pottage, and then he saw the cock lying on a plate. "Come shake yourself, cock," said Puss. So the cock shook himself and got up, and the cat took the cock home and the dead foxes too. And when they got home, they skinned them to make nice beds to lie upon, and lived happily together in peace and plenty. and as they laughed over the joke as a good joke, we may laugh over it too. End of section 19. Recording by Kyle Donnellan.
Section 20 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kurt from Tucson, Arizona. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Serpent Tsarevich and His Two Wives. There was once a Tsaritsa who had no child, and greatly desired one, so the soothsayers said to her, "Bid them catch thee a pike, bid them boil its head, and nothing but its head, eat it, and thou shalt see what will happen." So she did so. She ate the pike's head, and went about as usual for a whole year, and when the year was out, she gave birth to a son who was a serpent. And no sooner was he born than he looked about him and said, "Mammy and Daddy, bid them make me a stone hut, and let there be a little bed there, and a little stove, and a fire to warm me, and let me be married in a fortnight." So they did as he desired. They shut him up in a stone hut, with a little bed, and a little stove, and fire to warm him, and in a fortnight he grew quite big. Indeed, he grew too big for his little bed. "And now," said he, "I want to be married." So they brought to him all the fair young damsels of the land, that he might choose one to be his own true bride. Exceeding fair were all the damsels they brought him, and yet he would choose none of them. Now there was an old woman there, who had 12 daughters, and 11 of these daughters they brought to the Serpent Tsarevich, but not the 12th. "She is too young," said they. Then the youngest daughter said, "Ye fools, not to take me too! Why, if I were brought to the Serpent Tsarevich, he would make me his bride at once." Now this came to the Tsar's ears, and he commanded them to bring her to him straightway. And the Tsar said to her, "Wilt thou be my son's bride or not?" And she said, "I will. But before I go to thy son, give me at once a score of chemises, and a score of linen kirtles, and a score of woolen kirtles, and 20 pairs of shoes, 20 of each, I say." So the Tsar gave them to her, and she put on the 20 chemises, the 20 linen kirtles, the 20 woolen kirtles, and the 20 pairs of shoes, one after the other, and went to see the Serpent Tsarevich. When she came to the threshold of his hut, she stopped and said, "Hail, O Serpent Tsarevich!" "Hail, maiden!" cried he. "Wilt thou be my bride?" "I will." "Then take off one of thy skins," cried he. "Yes," she said, "but thou must do the same." So he cast off one of his skins, and she cast off one of her 20 suits of clothes. Then she cried out again, "Cast off another of thy skins, maiden." "Yes," she replied, "but thou must cast off one too." So he did so. 19 times did he cast off one of his serpent skins, and 19 times did she cast off one of her suits of clothes, till at last she had only her everyday suit left, and he had only his human skin left. Then he threw off his last skin also, and it flew about in the air like a gossamer, whereupon she seized hold of it, and threw it into the fire that was burning on the hearth, till it was all consumed, and he stood before her, no longer a serpent, but a simple Tsarevich. Then they married and lived happily together, but the husband never would go to visit his old father, the Tsar, nor would he allow his bride to go near the palace. The old Tsar sent for him again and again, but his son would never go. At last the wife was ashamed, and said to her husband one day, "Dear heart, let me go to thy father. I will only go for my own pastime, lest he get angry." "Why should I not go?" Then he let her go, and she went to the court of the old Tsar, and took her pastime there. She amused herself finely, and ate and drank her fill of all good things. Now her husband had laid this command upon her, "Go and divert thyself, if thou wilt, but if thou tell my father and my mother what has happened to me, and how I have lost my 20 serpent skins, thou shalt never see me more." For they did not know that he was now no longer a serpent, but a simple Tsarevich.
She vowed she would never tell, but for all her promises she nevertheless told them at last how her husband had lost his 20 serpent skins. Then she enjoyed herself to her heart's content, but when she returned home she found no trace of her husband. He had departed to another kingdom in the uttermost parts of the world. Then the poor bride sat her down and wept, and when she had no more tears to weep, she went forth into the wide world to seek her husband. She went on till she came to a lonely little house, and she went and begged a night's lodging from the old woman who dwelt there, who was the mother of the winds. But the mother of the winds would not let her in. "God preserve thee, child," said she. "My son is already winging his way hither. In another moment thou wilt hear the rustling of his wings, in another moment he will slay thee, and scatter thy bones to the 4 winds." But the bride besought the old woman till she had her desire, and the old woman hid her behind a huge chest. A moment afterward the son of the mother of the winds came flying up, and he smelt out the bride, and said, "What's this, mother? There is an evil smell of Cossack bones about the house." "No, it is not that," said his mother, "but a young woman has taken shelter here, who says that she is going in search of her husband." "Then, mother, give her the little silver apple, and let her go, for her husband is in another kingdom." So they sent her away with the little silver apple. She went on till night descended upon her, and she came to the lonely abode of another old woman, and begged a night's lodging of her also, but the old woman would not let her in. "My son will be here presently," said she, "and he will slay thee." "Nay, but granny," said the bride, "I have already stayed the night with such as thou, for I have lodged at the house of the mother of the winds." Then the old woman took her in, and hid her, for she was the mother of the moon. And immediately afterward the moon came flying up. "What is this, little mother?" cried he. "I smell an evil smell of Cossack bones." But she said to him, "Nay, my dear little son, but a young woman has come hither who is obliged to search for her husband, because she told his father and mother the truth." Then the moon said, "'Twould be as well to let her go on farther. Give her the little golden apple, and let her be off as quickly as possible, for her husband is about to marry another wife." So she passed the night there, and in the morning they sent her away with the little golden apple. She went on. Night again descended upon her, and she came to the house of the mother of the sun, and begged her for a night's lodging. But the old woman said to her, "I cannot let thee in. My son is flying about the world, but he will fly hither presently, and if he finds thee here, he will slay thee." Then the bride said, "Nay, but granny dear, I have already lodged with the like of thee. I have lodged with the mother of the winds and the mother of the moon, and they each gave me a little apple." Then the mother of the sun also let her in. Immediately afterward her son, the sun, came flying up, and he said, "Why, what is this, little mother? I smell an evil smell of Cossack bones." But his mother answered, "A young woman came hither who begged for a night's lodging." She did not tell her son the whole truth, that the bride was in search of her husband, but he knew it already, and said, "Her husband is about to marry another wife. Let her go to the land where now he is, and give her the diamond apple, which is the best and most precious apple in the whole world, and tell her to hasten on to the house where her husband abides. They won't let her in there, but she must disguise herself as an old woman, and sit down outside in the courtyard, and spread out a cloth, and lay upon it her little silver apple, and all the people will come flocking around to see the old woman who is selling apples of silver." So the bride did as the sun bade her, and went to that distant empire, and the empress of that empire, whom her husband had married, came to see what she was selling, and said to her, "What dost thou want for thy silver apple?" And she answered, "No money do I want for it. O sovereign lady, all that I require in exchange therefor is that I may pass the night near my husband." Then the empress took the apple, and allowed her to come into the bedchamber of the Tsarevich to pass the night there. But first of all she gave the Tsarevich a sleeping draught, so that he knew nothing, and could speak not a word to her, nor could he even recognize what manner of person his true wife was. Then only did the empress let her come into the room where her husband lay, and she watched over him. She watched over him the livelong night, and with the dawn she departed. The next morning he awoke out of his drugged sleep, and said to himself, "Why, what is this? It is just as if my first wife has been weeping over me here, and wetted me with her tears." But he told nobody what he thought, nor did he say a word about it to his second wife. "Wait a bit," thought he. "Tomorrow night I'll not go to sleep. I'll watch and watch till I watch the thing out." The next day the faithful wife spread out her little cloth again, and laid upon it her golden apple. The Empress again came that way, went up to her and said, "Sell me that apple of thine, and I'll give thee for it as many pence as thou canst hold in thy lap." But she replied, "Nay, my sovereign lady, money for it I will not take, but let me pass one more night in my own husband's room." And the Empress took the apple and let her go there. But first the Empress caressed and kissed her husband into a good humor, and then she gave him another sleeping draught. And the faithful wife came again and watched and wept over him and wetted him with her tears, and with the dawn she departed. And now she had only one apple left, but that was the diamond apple, the most precious apple in the world. And she said to the Empress, "Let me watch by him for this apple but one night more, and I'll never ask again." And she let her. Now this night also her husband was asleep, and his first wife came and immediately began to kiss him on the head, but he said nothing. Then she kissed him again, and at last he awoke and started up and said, "Who's that?" "It is I, thy first wife." "How hast thou found thy way hither?" "Oh, I have been here and there and everywhere. I have lodged with the mother of the winds, and the mother of the moon, and the mother of the sun. And they gave me 3 apples, and I gave these apples to thy Empress wife, and she let me watch over thee. And this is the 3rd night that I have watched by thy side." Then he came to his right mind, and cried aloud that they should bring in lights, and he saw that his faithful wife was quite an old woman. Then he bethought him, and said, "Was ever the like of this known? My first and faithful wife goes a-seeking her husband throughout the wide world, while my accursed second wife, Empress though she be, sells her husband for 3 apples." Then he bade them give his faithful wife rich garments, as much as she would, and she stripped off her disguise, and washed her face, and grew young again. But the faithless wife was tied to the tails of 4 wild horses, and they tore her to pieces in the endless steppe. End of section 20.
Section 21 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. Chapter 21. The Origin of the Mole. Once upon a time, a rich man and a poor man had a field in common, and they sowed it with the same seed at the same time. But God prospered the poor man's labour and made his seed to grow, but the rich man's seed did not grow. Then the rich man claimed that part of the field where the grain had sprung up, and said to the poor man, "Look now, 'tis my seed that has prospered, and not thine." The poor man protested, but the rich man would not listen, but said to him, "If thou wilt not believe me, then, poor man, come into the field quite early to-morrow morning, before dawn, and God shall judge betwixt us." Then the poor man went home. But the rich man dug a deep trench in the poor man's part of the field, and placed his son in it, and said to him, "Look now, my son, when I come hither to-morrow morning, and ask whose field this is, say that it is not the poor man's, but the rich man's." Then he well covered up his son with straw, and departed to his own house. In the morning all the people assembled together and went to the field. And the rich man cried, "Speak, O God, whose field is this, the rich man's or the poor man's?" "The rich man's! The rich man's!" cried a voice from the midst of the field. But the Lord himself was among the people gathered together there, and he said, "Listen not to that voice, for the field is verily the poor man's." Then the Lord told all the people how the matter went, and then he said to the son of the rich man, "Stay where thou art, and sit beneath the earth all thy days, so long as the sun is in the sky." So the rich man's son became a mole on the spot, and that is why the mole always flies the light of day. End of chapter 21.
Section 22 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are on the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Two Princes. There was once upon a time a king who had 2 sons, and these sons went a hunting in the forest and there lost themselves. They wandered on and on for 12 weeks. And at the end of the 12 weeks they came to a place where 3 roads met, and the elder brother said to the younger, "My brother, here our roads part. Take thou the road on that side, and I'll take the road on this." Then the elder brother took a knife and stuck it into the trunk of a maple tree by the roadside, and said, "Look now, brother, should any blood drip from the blade of this knife, it will be a sign that I am perishing, and thou must go and seek me. But if any blood flow from the handle, it will be a sign that thou art perishing, and I will then go and seek thee." Then the brothers embraced each other and parted, and one went in one direction, and the other went in the other. The elder brother went on and on and on and on, till he came to a mountain so high that there cannot be a higher, and he began climbing it, with his dog and his stick. He went on till he came to an apple tree, and beneath the apple tree a fire was burning, and he stopped to warm himself, when an old woman came up to him and said, dear little gentleman, tie up that dog lest he bite me." So he took the dog and tied it up, and immediately he was turned to stone, and the dog too, for the old woman was a pagan witch. Time passed, and the younger brother came back to the maple tree by the crossroads, and saw that blood was dripping from the blade of the knife. Then he knew that his brother was perishing, and he went in search of him, and came at last to a high mountain that was higher than all the others, and on the top of this mountain there was a little courtyard, and in the little courtyard an old woman, who said to him, "Little prince, what brings thee hither, and what dost thou seek?" "I seek my brother," said he. "A whole year has passed since I heard of him, and I know not whether he be alive or dead." Then she said to him, "I can tell thee that he is dead, and it is of no use seeking for him, though thou goest the wide world over. But go up that mountain, and thou wilt come to 2 other mountains opposite to each other, and there thou wilt find an old man who will put thee on thy way." So he went up the high mountain till he came to 2 other mountains that were opposite each other, and there he saw 2 old men sitting, and they asked him straightway, little prince, whither dost thou go, and what dost thou seek?" "I am going in search of my brother," said he, "my dear elder brother who is perishing, and I can find him nowhere." Then one of the old men said to him, "If thou canst scale those 2 mountains yonder without falling, I'll give thee all that thou dost want." Then he scaled the 2 mountains as nimbly as a goat, and the old man gave him a bast rope 3 fathoms long, and bade him return to the mountain where was the fire and the old woman who had asked him to stay and warm himself, and bind this old woman with the cord, and beat her till he promised to bring his brother back to life again. And not only this brother, but a Tsar, and a Tsaritsa, and a Tsarivna, who were also turned to stone there. Footnote: Tsaritsa, the wife of a Tsar. End footnote. "Beat her till she has brought them all to life again," said they. So he took the cord and went back to where the fire was burning. An apple tree was there, and beneath the apple tree was the fire, and the old witch came out to him, and said, little master, let me come and warm myself." "Come along, little mother," cried he, "come and warm thyself, and make thyself comfortable." Then she came out, but no sooner had she done so, than he threw the cord around her, and began flogging her. "Say," cried he, "what hast thou done with my brother?" "Oh, dear little master, dear little master, let me go, let me go. I will tell ye this instant where thy brother is." But he wouldn't listen, but beat her, and held her naked feet over the fire, and toasted and roasted her till she was shriveled right up. Then he let her go, and she went with him to a cave that was on that mountain, and drew from the depths of it some healing and life-giving water, and brought his brother back to life again. But it was as much as she could do, for she was half dead herself. Then his brother said to him, "Oh, my dear brother, how heavily I must have been sleeping, but thou must revive thy faithful dog too." Then she revived the faithful dog, and she also revived the Tsar, the Tsaritsa, and the Tsarivna, who had been turned to stone there. Then they left that place, and when they had gone a little distance, the elder brother bowed to the ground and went on his way alone. He went on and on till he came to a city where all the people were weeping, and all the houses were hung with black cloth. Then he said to them, "Why do you weep, and why are all your houses hung with black?" And they answered, "Because there's a dragon here who eats the people, and it has come to such a pass with us that tomorrow we must give him our princess for dinner." "Nay, but ye shall not do this thing," said he, and, with that, he set out for the cavern where the dragon lived, and tethered his horse there and slept by the side of the cavern all night. And the next day, sure enough, the princess was brought to the mouth of the cavern. She came driving thither in a carriage and four, and with a heyduck in attendance. Footnote: heyduck, a Hungarian soldier. But when the prince saw her, he came forth to meet her, and led her aside and gave her a prayer book in her hand, and said to her, "Stay here, princess, and pray to God for me." Then she fell down on her knees and began to pray, and the dragon popped one of his heads out of the cavern and said, "It is time I had my dinner now, and there's not so much as a breakfast here." But the prince also fell down on his knees, and read out of his prayer book, and prayed to God, and said to the dragon, come forth, and I'll give ye the breakfast and dinner at the same time." Then the dragon darted back again, but when he had waited till midday, and still there was neither breakfast nor dinner for him, he popped two of his heads out, and cried, "It is high time I had my dinner, and still there is neither breakfast nor dinner for me." "Come forth, and I'll give thee both at once," cried the prince. Then the dragon wouldn't wait any longer, but stuck out all his 6 heads and began to wriggle out of the cavern. But the prince attacked him with his huge broadsword, a full fathom long, which the Lord had given him, and chopped off all the dragon's 6 heads, and the rock fell upon the dragon's body and crushed it to pieces. Then the prince gathered up the 6 dragon heads, and laid them on one side, and cut out the 6 lolling tongues, and tied them in his handkerchief, and told the princess to go back to her palace, for they could not be married for a year and 12 weeks, and if by that time he did not appear, she was to marry another, and with that he departed. Then the coachman of the princess came up to the place, and saw the 6 heads of the dragon, and took them up, and said to the princess, "I will slay thee on the spot if thou dost not swear to me 12 times that thou wilt say I slew the dragon, and wilt take me for thy husband." Then she swore it 12 times, for else he would have slain her. So they returned together to the town, and immediately all the black cloth was taken off the houses, and the bells fell a-ringing, and all the people rejoiced because the coachman had killed the dragon. "Let them be married at once," cried they. Meanwhile the king's son went on and on till he came to that town where he had left his brother, and there he found that the Tsar and the Tsaritsa had given his brother the whole tsardom, and the Tsarivna to wife as well, and there he tarried for a time. But toward the end of a year and 12 weeks he went back to the other city where he had left the princess, and there he found them making ready for a grand wedding. "What is the meaning of all this?" asked he, and they answered, "The Tsar's coachman has slain the dragon with 6 heads and saved the princess, and now he is to be married to her." "Good Lord!" cried he, "and I never saw this dragon. What manner of beast was it?" Then they took him and showed him the heads of the dragon, and he cried, "Good Lord! Every other beast hath a tongue, but this dragon hath none." Then they told this to the coachman, who had been made a prince, and the coachman was very angry and said, "Whoever maintains that a dragon has tongues, him will I order to be tied to 4 wild horses, and they shall tear him to pieces on the open steppe." The princess, however, recognized the king's son, but she held her peace. Then the king's son took out his handkerchief, unrolled it, showed them the 6 tongues, and put each one into one of the 6 mouths of the dragon's 6 heads, and each of the tongues began to speak, and bid the princess say how the matter went. Then the princess told how she had knelt down and prayed out of the prayer book while the king's son slew the dragon, and how the wicked coachman had made her swear 12 times to that which was false. When the Tsar heard this, he immediately gave the princess his daughter to the king's son, and asked him what death the wicked coachman should die. And he answered, "Let him be tied to the tails of the 4 wild horses, and drive them into the endless steppe, that they may tear him to pieces there, and the raven and crows may come and pick his bones." End of section 22.
Section 23 of Cossack Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Cossack Fairy Tales by Robert Nisbet Bain. The Ungrateful Children and the Old Father Who Went to School Again. Once upon a time there was an old man. He lived to a great age, and God gave him children whom he brought up to man's estate, and he divided all his goods amongst them. "I will pass my remaining days among my children," thought he. So the old man went to live with his eldest son, and at first the eldest son treated him properly, and did reverence to his old father. "'Tis but meet and right that we should give our father to eat and drink, and see that he has wherewithal to clothe him, and take care to patch up his things from time to time, and let him have clean new shirts on festivals," said the eldest son. So they did so, and at festivals also the old father had his own glass beside him. Thus the eldest son was a good son to his old father. But when the eldest son had been keeping his father for some time, he began to regret his hospitality, and was rough to his father, and sometimes even shouted at him. The old man no longer had his own set place in the house as heretofore, and there was none to cut up his food for him. So the eldest son repented him that he had said he would keep his father, and he began to grudge him every morsel of bread that he put in his mouth. The old man had nothing for it but to go to his second son. It might be better for him there, or worse, but stay with his eldest son any longer he could not. So the father went to his second son. But here the old man soon discovered that he had only exchanged wheat for straw. Whenever he began to eat, his second son and his daughter-in-law looked sour and murmured something between their teeth. The woman scolded the old man. "We had as much as we could do before to make both ends meet," cried she, "and now we have old men to keep into the bargain." The old man soon had enough of it there also, and went on to his next son. So one after another all 4 sons took their father to live with them, and he was glad to leave them all. Each of the 4 sons, one after the other, cast the burden of supporting him on one of the other brothers. "It is for him to keep thee, Daddy," said they. And then the other would say, "Nay, Dad, but it is as much as we can do to keep ourselves." Thus between his 4 sons he knew not what to do. There was quite a battle among them as to which of them should not keep their old father. One had one good excuse, and another had another, and so none of them would keep him. This one had a lot of little children, and that one had a scold for a wife, and this house was too small, and that house was too poor. "Go where thou wilt, old man," said they, "only don't come to us." And the old man, grey, grey, grey as a dove was he, wept before his sons, and knew not whither to turn. What could he do? Entreaty was in vain. Not one of the sons would take the old man in, and yet he had to be put somewhere. Then the old man strove with them no more, but let them do with him even as they would. So all 4 sons met and took counsel. Time after time they laid their heads together, and at last they agreed among themselves that the best thing the old man could do was to go to school. "There will be a bench for him to sit upon there," said they. and he could take something to eat in his knapsack. Then they told the old man about it. But the old man did not want to go to school. He begged his children not to send him there, and wept before them. "Now that I cannot see the white world," said he, "how can I see a black book? Moreover, from my youth upward I have never learnt my letters. How shall I begin to do so now? A clerk cannot be fashioned out of an old man on the point of death." But there was no use talking. His children said he must go to school, and the voices of his children prevailed against his feeble old voice. So to school he had to go. Now there was no church in that village, so he had to go to the village beyond it to school. A forest lay along the road, and in this forest the old man met a nobleman driving along. When the old man came near to the nobleman's carriage, he stepped out of the road to let it pass, took off his hat respectfully, and then would have gone on farther. But he heard someone calling, and, looking back, saw the nobleman beckoning to him. He wanted to ask him something. The nobleman then got out of his carriage and asked the old man whither he was going. The old man took off his hat to the nobleman and told him all his misery, and the tears ran down the old man's cheeks. "Woe is me, gracious sir! If the Lord had left me without kith and kin, I should not complain. But strange indeed is the woe that has befallen me. I have 4 sons, thank God, and all 4 have houses of their own, and yet they send their poor old father to school to learn. Was ever the like of it known before?" So the old man told the nobleman his whole story, and the nobleman was full of compassion for the old man. "Well, old man," said he, "'tis no use for thee to go to school, that's plain. Return home. I'll tell thee what to do so that thy children shall never send thee to school again. Fear not, old man, weep no more, and let not thy soul be troubled. God shall bless thee, and all will be well. I know well what ought to be done here." So the nobleman comforted the old man, and the old man began to be merry. Then the nobleman took out his purse. It was a real nobleman's purse, with a little sack in the middle of it to hold small change. Lord, what a lovely thing it was! The more he looked at it, the more the old man marvelled at it. The nobleman took this purse and began filling it full with something. When he had well filled it, he gave it to the old man. "Take this and go home to thy children," said he, "and when thou hast got home, call together all thy 4 sons, and say to them, 'My dear children, long, long ago, when I was younger than I am now, and knocked about in the world a bit, I made a little money. I won't spend it,' I said to myself, 'for one never knows what may happen.' So I went into a forest, my children, and dug a hole beneath an oak, and there I hid my little store of money. I did not bother much about the money afterward, because I had such good children. But when you sent me to school, I came to this self same oak, and I said to myself, 'I wonder if these few silver pieces have been waiting for their master all this time. Let us dig and see.' So I dug and found them, and have brought them home to you, my children. I shall keep them till I die, but after my death consult together, and whosoever shall be found to have cherished me most, and taken care of me, and not grudged me a clean shirt now and then, or a crust of bread when I'm hungry, to him shall be given the greater part of my money. So now, my dear children, receive me back again, and my thanks shall be yours. You can manage it amongst you, and surely 'tis not right that I should seek a home among strangers. Which of you will be kind to your old father? For money." So the old man returned to his children with the purse in a casket, and when he came to the village with the casket under his arm, one could see at once that he had been in a good forest, that is, a forest where treasure is hidden. When one comes home with a heavy casket under one's arm, depend upon it, there's something in it." So no sooner did the old man appear than his eldest daughter-in-law came running out to meet him, and bade him welcome in God's name. "Things don't seem to get on at all without thee, Dad," cried she, "and the house is quite dreary. Come in and rest, Dad," she went on. "Thou hast gone a long way and must be weary." Then all the brothers came together, and the old man told them what God had done for him. All their faces brightened as they looked at the casket, and they thought to themselves, "If we keep him, we shall have the money." Then the four brothers could not make too much of their dear old father. They took care of him, and the old man was happy, but he took heed to the counsel of the nobleman, and never let the casket out of his hand. "After my death you shall have everything, but I won't give it you now, for who knows what may happen? I have seen already how you treated your old father when he had nothing. It shall all be yours, I say, only wait. And when I die, take it and divide it as I have said." So the brothers tended their father, and the old man lived in clover, and was somebody. He had his own way, and did nothing. So the old man was no longer ill-treated by his children, but lived among them like an emperor in his own empire, but no sooner did he die than his children made what haste they could to lay hands upon the casket. All the people were called together, and bore witness that they had treated their father well since he came back to them, so it was adjudged that they should divide the treasure amongst them. But first they took the old man's body to church, and the casket along with it. They buried him as God commands. They made a rich banquet of funeral meats, that all might know how much they mourned the old man. It was a splendid funeral. When the priest got up from the table, the people all began to thank their hosts, and the eldest son begged the priest to say the Sorokoust, the prayers lasting 40 days, in the church for the repose of the dead man's soul. "Such a dear old fellow as he was," said he. "Was there ever any one like him? Take this money for the Sorokoust, reverend father." So horribly grieved was that eldest son. So the eldest son gave the priest money, and the second son gave him the like. Nay, each one gave him money for an extra half Sorokoust. All four gave him requiem money. "We'll have prayers in church for our father though we sell our last sheep to pay for them," cried they. Then, when all was over, they hastened as fast as they could to the money. The coffer was brought forth. They shook it. There was a fine rattling inside it. Every one of them felt and handled the coffer. That was something like a treasure. Then they unsealed it and opened it and scattered the contents. And it was full of nothing but glass. They wouldn't believe their eyes. They rummaged among the glass, but there was no money. It was horrible. Surely it could not be that their father had dug up a coffer from beneath an oak of the forest, and it was full of nothing but glass. "Why," cried the brothers, "our father has left us nothing but glass." But for the crowds of people there, the brothers would have fallen upon and beaten each other in their wrath. So the children of the old man saw that their father had made fools of them. Then all the people mocked them. "You see what you have gained by sending your father to school? You see he learned something at school after all. He was a long time before he began learning, but better late than never. It appears to us 'twas a right good school you sent him to. No doubt they whipped him into learning so much. Never mind, you can keep the money and the casket." Then the brothers were full of lamentation and rage. But what could they do? Their father was already dead and buried. End of Section 23